to the Wizard Factory video podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper knowledge of the universe and yourself. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
And if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button real quick. We really appreciate that. And give us a like as well. So getting into this, last week we touched on a new topic, part one of a series that we're going to conclude this evening, on the concept of coexistence with religious tolerance. And in last week's episode, we kind of looked more specifically at the Christian religion, again, because it's the most familiar to Brian and me. We were both raised in Christian homes, and because it's more or less the most prevalent religion still here in the West. So it's still a relevant topic very much. And so in that, we touched on a few things, such as the Omnist mindset, which is what is really depicted in those Coexist bumper stickers, and questioning the motives and the actual feasibility of such an ideology. And really, what we were saying is that it's sort of a two-edged sword. It's really a balancing act. Certain ideologies should not be tolerated if they are defined as one which is militant or pushing on other people, evangelical, versus if it's something that's harmless but it's providing value to the individual, not understanding that you or no one else has the right to really impose your belief upon them in place of theirs, or to presume that yours is superior. And then, we kind of looked at intolerance, the forms, say, verbal and conversational versus violent or just all around combative. We looked at a couple of quotes from pagans and prolific Christians and just compared those mindsets of, one is saying we all live in the same nature, we all see the same truth, who am I to say what the right way is, versus St. Augustine saying, like, literally every other belief system should be obliterated and this is a holy work to be done. And then Brian read some excerpts from a really great book that we highly recommend called The Darkening Age by, what was it, Catherine Nixie?
Catherine Nixie, yeah.
And so we're going to continue this exploration of this idea, but in looking at a couple of different perspectives here. So starting out, we're going to kind of look at the other side of tolerance. So Brian, would you like to kind of open that up a little bit?
Yeah, just to kind of like finish a little recap, one of the reasons, we look so heavily into Andy in part one is because, as Logan said, it's a belief system that's still to this day the most prevalent belief system, especially here in the West. And there's foundational assumptions and ideas that come out of that have permeated into almost every area of our society. And the vast majority of people, even a lot of people within what you could call the alternative community or the truth community, or whatever label you want to put on it, are still kind of pushing this idea of, Christianity or Gnosticism, or these things actually being, belief systems that have something valuable to them, or that they were good and then they were just twisted and manipulated. And that's really just not the case at all. When, for me, I've always found it very interesting to go to the roots of things. Like, you want to find the root cause, or, if you're wanting to understand if there's a building that has like structural issue, the first place you want to look is the foundation. So you have to see what things are built off of. And when you start, one of the reasons we're reading passages from that book is because it specifically covers that subject, the early history of Christianity, and how it specifically had a mission to destroy the classical pagan world. And it very much did so to a great extent. But it was a very dark worldview that these early Christians had, and there were a lot of different sects, as we talked about in the previous episode. But even just looking at some of their art, there was one I was just looking at earlier here the temptation of Saint Anthony. And you see it, and he's here, and the sky is just very dark and dreary, and then you see these demons, and you see women around him, and it just really highlights for you, even in their art, the mindset of just how dark the world was, that it was just this place, the devil's playground and a place of temptations, or from the Gnostic perspective, it is just a prison. When you accept a mindset like that, and you start seeing that the world is just this very dreary place, but then there's this promise of this eternal heaven that's going to give you everything you want, it's very, very easy for people to start falling into very destructive behaviors, like trying to become martyrs, or going on crusades or jihad, and they're willing to not only die themselves but kill other people in the name of converting people to their cause. So those are very, it's a very dangerous ideology, and when something is built off of that, but yet throughout history and modern academia, as their version of history shows it to be this wonderful thing that like led to development, and before it was just these pagan barbarians that were committing human sacrifice, and these kind of ideas, that's really a gaslighted version of history, and not a lot of people are pointing that out, and really looking at these belief systems for what they really are. So that then kind of leads us into, well, where's the boundary? Like, intolerance is actually a healthy thing at a certain point. If there's someone trying to violently harm you or infringe upon your rights, you should not tolerate that. That's not a loving thing to yourself or them. Like, if you tolerate that behavior, not only are you going to get harmed, but that person's never going to learn. Like, so there comes a point that you have to stand up, and that doesn't have to be through violent means. Really, the form of intolerance that we obviously are speaking about or advocating most is what we're doing right here, right now, which is speaking out against something, being able to look at something philosophically and honestly and logically, and see whether or not that's consistent and in alignment with cosmic law, whether or not that is a belief system or an ideology that has a basis in free will and honoring the sovereignty of an individual, or whether it's something that does the exact opposite, and then judging that belief system based off of that. So that's really, I think, what we kind of want to highlight, and then our general message in this couple part episode, and then we're going to dig into some other examples here as well.
Yes, sir. Very well said there. On the subject of intolerance, we're definitely not saying that we should tolerate everything. At the same time, we're not saying that you shouldn't tolerate anything. It's literally a balance thing. To me, the best way that I can convey this concept is think about the two pillars of the non-aggression principle with the self-defense principle. They are two pillars that are both are completely necessary and prop each other up in order to maintain sovereignty. So this is really just the spiritual expression of the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle. Don't start shit, won't be shit, like respect everyone's freedom to do whatever the hell they want as long as they are not causing harm. And then, obviously that goes very plainly towards physical initiation of violence, i.e., crusades or persecution and suicide bombings and things of that nature. But even beyond that, and this could be a controversial area for a lot of hardcore natural law people, is that there are black and white aspects, but there are also gray areas. And I think that infringing people's personal boundaries, even if you're not physically harming them, there's still something to be said. I mean, you can say right and wrong. I mean, these are just words, but it's not ideal behavior. Being a jerk, being an asshole, being so arrogant to think that you need to force somebody to convert to your way of living in the world is utter garbage. And you may argue, well, it's their right, and technically they have the right to do that, but it's not good. It's not what a truly good or much less pious person, that's not how they would behave. So, yeah, would you like to, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh yeah, no, I really like that you brought up the violation of boundaries that goes even beyond like physical boundaries of like, physical harm, like forcing your ideology on someone. I think it's a great example to look at. Like, there's a lot of people in the truth movement, and I encountered someone the other day online that they'll just kind of, they've just started, like, they're, you can tell they're very still early in their stage of that kind of awakening process, and they still have that, everything's dark sided and satanic, and they'll then kind of call everybody else stupid or call everybody else sheep or tell them to do research. And then if you ask them, like, well, can you show me yours? And they're like, oh, you just need to go do it. Like, well, where is it? It's that mindset that it's coming from a place of just being very arrogant. But again, like you said, they just come off as assholes. And, so to where that's not going to help anybody at all. And if your goal is, if we're working from the assumption that your goal is to actually try to wake people up, that even though that's not your business to do, but if your goal is to share information to help people get that, going about that in a tactful way or being able to relate to them as another human being is going to be a lot more effective than just coming off as like a dogmatic asshole. That's something we talked about in those episodes we did before, the unconscious feedback loop, which if you guys haven't checked that out, those would definitely tie in with what we're talking about with a lot of this dogmatic belief here in this episode.
Yeah, I'll actually go ahead and link that video again to this one. We linked it in the last one, but I see this particular episode as a very good parallel with that one, specifically the one why history repeats, because especially with what we're going to get into here a little bit more in kind of looking at some of the perhaps roots of statism and how that came to be, comparison of those two, frankly, straight up religions, statism and like the Abrahamics, for example. But yeah, I'll go ahead and link that as well. So definitely check that video out if you are enjoying this type of concept. So yeah, the next thing we're going to look at is gangs being a collectivist cult, and how, much like a religion, they have their own ideologies, their own tenets, guidelines, something, it's that parallel of cults that everybody knows are bad, don't drink the Kool-Aid, or don't, like, go be in a gang. That's bad news, right? But then so many of the ways that these type of organizations operate can be seen in organized religions, and that has to be some kind of a red flag to you, frankly. I'm not saying that it's bad to have guidelines or ideology, but just think of that mentality of just like, we wear these colors and we act this kind of a way, and if you go against that collectivist mentality, you're highly ostracized or hazed or something of that nature. Those collectivist minded people don't really take kindly to that type of individualist thinking, and that's really what we're digging at here. Is there's a problem with that. There's something very unhealthy and off about that if you need to constantly be imposing like that.
Right. Yeah, I like that you brought up looking at other ideologies, what most people want to consider a religion, because with the omnist mindset, that is specifically more in context to looking at religions. But what is a religion other than an ideology that a collective or a group of people are prescribing to? So whether or not they're calling their ideology a religion or not, that doesn't really matter if the effects are playing out in the same way. And so kind of looking at the idea of being too tolerant to certain other ideologies that could be very dangerous, such like you mentioned gangs, there are other groups, there's a lot of cults out there that have spread out of even just the Abrahamic mindset. There's thousands of different sects, and a lot of them go very extreme, or there's a lot of cults that, they're very apocalyptic in nature, or they're expecting aliens to come save them. Like, that's all really coming out of the Abrahamics. It's looking for a savior. It's that the end of times kind of this doomsday scenario, and then they use that to control people. These are not belief systems that you should be looking for something good in. You know, that there are definitely dangerous ideologies that you need to be very weary of. So having a very being too open and just thinking that, oh, everybody has the right to believe what they want, that's only a half truth. You know, like, yeah, they can believe what they want, but if their actions are playing out that they're actually causing harm to people, or again, they're fundamentally not based in sovereignty or, you know, honoring a person's free will, then, you know, again, that's not something we should just accept, let alone try to learn from.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a great example, you know, of something where it's kind of normalized to not tolerate. You know, from aside from non-gang members, there's generally a lot of shame and sort of, you know, a negative stigma that comes with gang members, or say like the KKK, for example. Great example, not to mention because
Yeah.
A, they have a history of violence, but B, even better, most KKK groups are strongly rooted in Christian beliefs, specifically, yeah, like a sort of a white nationalist,
British
God,
Israelism.
one nation under God type of mentality. Yes, yes,
Yeah, that's
pro-Israel.
well, like
Exactly.
specifically even British Israelism. This was actually, I kind of researched into this specifically into like the Klan and things when I was a kid. And that's one of the things, is they very much base their ideology not only in Christianity, but this idea of British Israelism, which is the idea that like one of Noah's daughters was one of the first, you know, people in Ireland that settled Ireland, pretty much trying to bring this Middle Eastern philosophy over the European heritage, and they very much prescribe to that, and then will use that as a justification for their white supremacist beliefs. So I'm really glad that you brought that example up, because you can see how that mind control, or these dogmatic belief systems, they can build up in layers, you know. So there's the basis of Christianity, but then there's a certain sect of, you know, people that they take, and then they take that belief system and they use that to justify something more extreme, you know. And
Right.
that's how these cult-like mentalities will work, is they will eventually end up in that place of extreme violence, of trying to, you know, kill themselves or others, you know.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that's the irony, is that it's very common for people to not accept or tolerate these type of organizations, yet there's kind of a double standard going on with Islam and Christianity, for example, that clearly have a much, I'd say even a much more dangerous and violent history than the KKK. I mean, the
Oh
body
yeah.
count alone, it's staggering. Yet these are all like, oh yeah, coexist, you know, that very liberal, everybody, you know, melting pot type of thing. But the melting
Hmm.
pot don't work if you're mixing in, you know, bad stuff that's, you know, going to ruin the whole batch. But
Yeah.
yeah, and definitely say, for example, the irony of a lot of white supremacists dabble in this sort of pseudo neo paganism, when ironically, to me, what that is trauma playing out. It's white people who were violently disconnected from their true pagan, you know, probably Nordic descent roots, and but yet they're very much playing out an unconscious feedback loop from the monovirus of the mind. Because think about, what is white supremacy? Only one race, like eradicate the other. I mean, it's the same kind of like, it's a sick ego that wants to make everything as close to it so it doesn't have to be threatened or feel disempowered. So rather than
Right.
feeling less than, they have to create some sort of psychological pedestal to put themselves on, whether it's some, you know, it's something they're identified, whether it's their religion, their race, their gender. This is all basic, like Hegelian dialectic mind control that's happening
Hmm.
rampant all over the place, and it's wreaking havoc on what we're creating collectively,
Yeah,
because
that's a
we're
great
not,
point. I like. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, because the difference is we're running from matrix mind programs instead of true, like, Sawillo,
Hmm.
true soul
Yeah, I
path.
like that you brought that point up, specifically in the context of people who are maybe like Odinists, or a lot of practices of Alpha through. that will kind of use that as a justification, especially like in prison gangs and things. That's obviously very very strong there. So we can see how a lot of these ideology, they can again they can layer and stack up. But I think you're on point in saying that's really coming out of a reaction to the trauma that has been brought on by this monotheistic, these Abrahamic ideologies, and then out of an extreme, trauma-based reaction, they then, play out that same ideology, but in a way that what they think is actually their ancestral path when it really isn't. And I think that's why it's so, we've done previous episodes, the holistic paganism, where we spoke about this a little bit, and why, specifically if you were looking into a pagan or animistic path, having diversity, whether that's in the gods that you're working with or your ritual or the different tools you're using or whatever it is, having a diverse spiritual path and belief system is very good. It's very healthy for you. You create a healthy spiritual ecosystem, so to speak. Again, that would very much play in with this, whereas if you see when people start thinking there's only this one way and it falls into that dogma, that is always going to lead to something very dangerous in the way it plays out, and that may take time, but that's where it ends up.
Very well said there. So yeah, the next little concept that we're going to kind of look at here is the idea of blasphemy, speaking bad about the big man upstairs. And so when this talking point came up with me and Brian, immediately this quote popped into my head. And incidentally, this quote has been somewhat viral on the internet via memes and such, but improperly attributed to Voltaire, who actually never said this. It was someone named Kevin Strom, who said that to determine the true rulers of any society, all you must do is ask yourself this question: who is it that I am not permitted to criticize? So obviously the example of, say, Israel comes to mind, because they have some of the strongest, free speech violations via laws that are based in anti-Semitism. Anything that, so if you criticize the state of Israel, then you're basically called a racist, and they actually can legally detain you, rough you up, all everything nasty that the state is oh so good at. And really this same exact concept is seen in religion, where if you speak ill against God, whether it's taking his name in vain, that there's another 10 commandment: thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. I distinctly remember getting in trouble when I was young if I even said God, or instead of gosh. Like it's that, like especially in goddamn was like the very worst thing that you could possibly. It's worse than fuck by far. Like if you say GD, like you're gonna get an ass whooping.
Yeah, I got a lot of soap in my mouth as a kid, like for that, like, or had to write Bible verses like thousands of times as like punishment for doing that. So it's especially even to this day still in kind of in the Bible Belt, there's still definitely people and parents who will take that stance on it, like they'll actually punish their children for speaking out against God, or criticizing the dead guy on a stick. How dare anyone say Jesus didn't exist, for one, but that he probably wasn't as good of a person, or it wasn't a message of love and light that he had. If you say that, a lot of people will like literally, their heads will kind of explode. But it's very interesting to see that people will take an ideology like that, and then they'll take such an extreme stance that they actually believe that there's this being that's that judgmental that if they even utter certain words, they're going to be punished for it. Like it's really like ridiculous when you think about it. You can laugh at it a little bit, but it's also not very funny when you see that there's actually people that will then act on that belief. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really gaslighting 101, because just think of the battered wife syndrome. What's one thing you're never going to catch her doing when the husband is around, is talking shit about him or saying like any of the bad stuff he does. Well, so why is that microcosmic example seen most prevalent in the two biggest forms of mind control, government and religion? They both have some form of blasphemy. And obviously, well, yeah, that's only in tyrannical governments, but that's completely besides the point. All forms of government are inherently based upon the initiation of violence against peaceful people that just want to be left the hell alone. Likewise, say pagans, for example, are just peaceful people that want to be left the hell alone, but instead of, worrying about jail, they're being threatened with hell. So jail and hell, all these similarities are absolutely just undeniable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the example of like a battered wife. When you see in that situation, you would see the person that because they've been a victim of abuse, or or if they've been with a narcissist, they're actually very afraid to speak out about the abuse that's actually occurred, because they don't want that person to look bad or whatever that may be. When you see that, how that's really coming out of a very toxic kind of dynamic, that's very much a reflection of that same kind of relationship that people will have with Christianity, or Islam, or these other Abrahamic traditions where blasphemy is actually a sin to do. To me, that really points to that same kind of relationship. There's a narcissistic abuser, this Jehovah God, that is then literally enforcing so much trauma that people are actually afraid to speak out against it, because they're afraid of what might happen. There's people that actually believe they'll be punished for eternity because of it. That's not a good religion or a belief system that should be tolerated at all.
Right, and the most typical outcome of this scenario is actually a radical counterbalance or overcompensation. Not only are they afraid to speak negatively, but then they go into full-blown Stockholm syndrome, where they're singing his praises. Does that sound familiar? Well, worshiping and venerating, and whether it's a politician or Jesus Christ, it's the same kind of thing of you're venerating and worshiping the very one that's imposing their, like, crushing your spirit essentially, and completely laying claim to your body, your free will choices. And that's everything that we're against here with the Wizard Factory and our message is the exact opposite of that. So if you're wondering why we're starting to really put our sights more on religion, and especially Christianity, is because it is like a representation of the antithesis of our message. It is like the one thing that most represents everything that we want to see go away or become forgotten in way of a much better way of thinking and living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it comes down to sovereignty. And like you said, it's laying, whether that's they're laying claim over like your body, or your life. But even, in Christianity's example, it's a lay of claim over your very soul. That your soul isn't your own. That it's just something that is there to be judged by this other being. And
gifted to you. God
right.
gave you this life, so you just owe your whole life to him, because, well, what's the alternative? Not existing.
Right. Yeah. It's yeah. So when you see something that is just that fundamentally against a person's free will, against a person's sovereignty, you have to recognize it for what it is, which is a mind virus. So that's definitely something to look at. And another kind of good point that we can see here that you hit on, that many times the state will have laws that you can't speak out against it, or whether it is in the medieval times, you couldn't, if you would have said something about the king, you could have lost your head or whatever that may be. And then still to this day, Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now you get zucked, or other things that happens. But this, you can really see the relationship between Christianity and the state, even early Christianity. As soon as it started to take hold after Constantine, within 50 to 100 years, you started seeing a lot of laws passed that were literally, outlawing any kind of literature that wasn't Christian, even if it wasn't religious. Like we mentioned in the previous episode, there was lots of poems and satire and, all sorts of different things that were literally just not allowed. They were considered blasphemous. So then they were burned. So I think it just goes to the point that, especially when if you have one dogmatic belief that's built off of another and they start to layer up, like we've been talking about, you see how they help enforce each other. And eventually, when it gets to the point of there's a state that is backed by religious ideology, even if it's not overtly pushing one religious ideology, if you see it still has its foundations coming from a certain belief system like the Abrahamics, eventually it's going to, push itself as a representation of this is the only way. And we see that with statism. If you try to like talk to anybody about the idea of having a voluntary society, a lot of people have an extreme, knee-jerk reaction that will fight you on that, and they'll, oh, this is the only way it can be. That's just how it has to be. That's just the natural way. It's just a reflection and a progression of this same kind of mind virus.
Mm-hmm. And then clearly we see that this mind virus starts taking new forms. It's like any other good virus. What does it do? It mutates. It renews itself. It adapts. And to me, statism is a mutation of religion, where it's taken on a new form, which, with all mind control, is something that is created and implanted to bring about a specific outcome that benefits the person that plants it at the expense or exploitation of the person that it was implanted in. To me, that's truly what mind control is, because if you're mind controlling somebody to do something that's good for them, it's not really the same kind of issue. So statism, and that's why the old religion, the old world religion, is things like monotheistic beliefs. The new religion for the new world order is statism. It's way better in terms of its effectiveness. Look at the way people froth at the mouth over Trump and Hillary now is no different than the way people are fighting about Islam and Christianity. It may not be to the same degree of violence for say, but the emotional mind control definitely is on par, I would say. But the thing is, what makes religions the most dangerous is when they're backed by the state. I was thinking about this earlier. I actually made a post on Facebook about it. Religion without the state is like a shark without teeth. It's the sword. It's the actual instrument of destruction. That's why allegedly people are supposed to, there's this idea of separation of church and state, but the state literally itself isn't a religion, so that can never be. You can't separate dogma from the state or religion from the state, because it is a religion, and it's the most prevalent and common one, and by far the most dangerous, because it's all these different ways that have convinced people and duped people into bogus reasons, pseudo justifications for actually initiating violence. Whether it's a fucking parking ticket or a tithe, it's all different forms of extortion and enforcement, behavioral control through coercion. So, monotheism really paves the way to statism, and we very much can see that, in things like political ideologies such as Nazism, communism. Those are just ideologies too. What they may not be talking about Jesus, or but they have their own figureheads. There's again all these parallels of the state and religion. You pay your tithes, you vote, which is like praying. You have your leaders, you have your designated garb to look the part. You could just go on and on, dividing all those parallels. But yeah, before I continue, yeah, you want to? You want to add anything to that?
I do actually. Yeah, I really like that. How you can, really compared to religion without the state is like a shark without teeth. You can very even see that, in the history of Christianity for the first three centuries, 3.5 centuries or so. It was a religion that it was just a crazy sect of people. They didn't really have any political power or anything like that. It was when the Emperor Constantine uh, saw that as a way to conquer, with his vision, his famous vision of saying, conquer in this sign that, and then he gave it to the Roman military. Then, like as we mentioned before, within 50 to 100 years, you really start seeing all these laws passed, which then justifies that violence. So that ideology then now has the legal backing to enforce itself. And then, it has the power of being able to use armies and the funding of the state, so that's a very, very on point quote, because you definitely saw that even Christianity didn't really have a lot of teeth until it got its power from the Roman state, and that's when it took off, and it took off very, very quickly from there. Like,
right, because just think about the level of organization that is required to have a government that is supposedly in power. If it doesn't have power, it's not really a government, right? As far as the authority or the jurisdiction or whatever bullshit made up word that you want to go with. We're talking about some sort of justification for force. And, the statism is also intolerant, militant, and dogmatic, and incompatible with true freedom and sovereignty. So just as the state lays claim to your body and the fruits of your labor and says you can't put these drugs in your body and you have to give this certain amount of, money to us every so often, it's just another form of control and enslavement. And I think the verse that really just drives this home, just puts the last nail in the coffin. I think a lot of people are familiar with this that have even begun to question, especially those who are already leaning towards the side of anarchism, is Romans 13. So that verse 1-5 says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authorities is rebelling against God or what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishments, but also as a matter of conscience." I mean, this is gaslighting to the nth degree. Not only should you obey your worldly masters because of the bad things that could happen to you, which is not a matter of virtue, but just sheer practicality, but also as a matter of conscience. In other words, you're inherently a bad person just because you rebel. So I mean, there's no room for interpretation here. This is uncovering all the Hitlers and the Stalins and the dictators ever. Saddam Hussein and everybody were put there by God, and if you're rebelling against them or even speaking badly against them, you might as well be rising up against God himself, because they are an extension of him. I mean, this is just absolutely absurd.
right. Well, and that's something that, especially with this verse specifically, I know there's probably going to be a lot of people listening, especially if they're leaning more towards the Gnostic perspective, or they try to look at Christianity as an allegorical thing. They'll say that this verse obviously was put in there by the Romans to try to use as control. But as we mentioned in the first episode, with Christianity, the Abrahamics, they're the only religions that put themselves as a literal religion. That, oh, this person existed. Oh, this is God. Oh, this is the way that it has to be done.
Mhm.
So you can't then choose to just cherry pick what you like and don't like just because it's conflicting with what you're wanting to believe, which is the idea that this religion is a good thing, or that Jesus was an anarchist. So now you're trying to take all the little parts out of the Bible that you don't like, and then pick and choose the little things. This is factually, it's in the Bible. It's been used as a justification for the power of the state, whether that be through kings or the power of the church, or whatever have you. And a lot of suffering has then happened because of that. And that's just, it's a historical fact. You can see that the destruction that this belief system has caused. So that's one of the reasons we put it in here. We want to acknowledge it because it's not something you can just shy away, because you're like, oh, that conflicts with my message or my idea that Christianity is about freedom or whatever have you. It's in there. So, and I think it's very, very fucking clear in where Christianity stands on the idea of sovereignty and freedom.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the cherry picking thing again, because really, to me, Christians base so many of their arguments on the presupposition that, well, the Bible says this. They don't have any other means of backing something up that they're asserting as truth other than, well, it came from the Bible. Yet, if you ask them about Romans 13, if they have any sense enough to realize that verse is utter horseshit, they're going to be put in a difficult place, because they either have to make some caveat about, well, the Romans added this after, and the Romans was already corrupted and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, but it's in the Bible though. So if the Romans had a big part in creating the Bible, if they were corrupted, then it's not the infallible word of God. I mean, literally, you can't have both. Like, pick one. Either the Romans were corrupted and they used it for control purposes, or it's the fallible word of God, and every single word in there is 100% truth. It's just not going to go well for you either way if you follow that line of logic far enough.
Right, exactly. And that's, and this is, kind of ties back into one of the points that we talked about in part one of this episode, which was the idea that ignorance really has been a foundational part of Christianity for such a long time, because anything outside of the ideology is literally demonized. Literally, they believe it's the work of demons. So then they burn it and smash it, or they refuse to look at it. So then they only ever have this one source of information, this Bible, which is in itself an accumulation of many different works and books over, written by different authors from, over a long period of time. So, it's not a religion or a belief system that can really hold up to any honest logic, like if you're being honest with yourself. And the key when looking at it too, especially if you were like raised in a Christian home, or even here in the West, I know when I first started questioning it, even as a young kid, there was still that fear factor that, like, oh, well, what if I question it and I don't follow it, and then I die, and then I get punished for eternity? Like, that would suck. Like, there really is that programming, that fear really is in there. You have to realize how kind of ridiculous that belief is, and set that aside, and then start analyzing the rest of it. And when you see that the logic of it just doesn't make sense, it doesn't line up, and then you can see historically how that kind of belief system has played out and the damage it's caused. You can recognize that, oh, this isn't something that's good inherently. It's something that it just needs to be discarded, and then go find a path for you that is better.
Mm. Right. Yeah. So to sum up what we're getting at here, to really hone in on what it is we're actually trying to say, is that political ideologies should, any militant ideologies should not all be tolerated. Only the ones that respect mutually your sovereignty, your freedom. So obviously, again, Nazism, communism, these are fairly controversial and often not tolerated, especially Nazism. Communism is actually frighteningly popular these days, but technically all political parties are built on a platform of violence and coercion. So the only political stance that should be tolerated is anarchy, true freedom, true leave me the hell alone unless I'm actually doing something to wrong you. It really is that simple. And
Mm-hmm.
here with Zionism, you can see that. So like in last episode, we mentioned that of the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism is by far the least pushy, the least evangelical. But then Zionism is a great example of what even a relatively non-evangelical religion combined with the power of the state can become weaponized. And now look at the harm that they're causing and the suffering. And this is modern day. This is going on right now. This isn't the Crusades. This isn't a bunch of old medieval Dark Ages people. This is 2019, 2020, current events. So it's still relevant, and it's still, here we are. We're not going around stabbing people or crucifying them. We're making a podcast episode about it. We're saying, hey, this shouldn't be tolerated. Let's actually question this. The things that we throw these ideas around like coexist because it just sounds nice. It sounds like what a nice person would do. But see, that's the thing, is like when someone's disrespecting you, being nice is not a virtue. This is another thing that I think comes from the Christian mindset of turn the other cheek and all this kind of stuff. We're not saying you somebody that comes at you with the Bible, you should just run them through with a sword. That's not what we're saying. But to sit there and smile and grin and bear it instead of getting actually pissed off that they're not respecting you, that they're being so presumptuous and arrogant that they need to convert you. That's what we're talking about, is not tolerating that, checking that, saying, who do you think you are? That's right. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, a great example would be like when a Jehovah's Witness or somebody, like, they'll come up to the door, and I told a story on a previous episode. I can't remember which one it was, but essentially, like, I let the kid know, it's like, do you realize what you're doing is unsolicited? Like, I'm not showing up at your house and asking you if you've heard about the Norse gods. Like, I don't have any need for that. A really, I think a good example, it just popped in my head, that would really sum up a lot of this episode is the event that happened, I believe it was last year or late 2018, with the island in Indonesia that has, the islanders that they believe they've been out there, undisturbed for like the last 60,000 years at least, or something like that, to the point that, they're actually protected by the governments in the area, that people aren't supposed to go there because you could very easily pass on a disease that they haven't been exposed to, and wipe out their whole population. And there was this Christian evangelical named John Chow that decided to go out there, that specifically, snuck his way on there, had multiple encounters, like, where he was just trying to, like, show them the Bible, and was like yelling at them in English as if like they're gonna understand what the fuck he's saying, or they even need his book at all, and they kept trying to get him to go away, and he wouldn't go away, and then they ended up killing him. Like, that's the thing, is like, this person's ideology was so fucking dangerous that instead of respecting the people that have been there by themselves for so much time, like, they've been on that island longer than your fucking religion has even existed, and they have the need to, or he has the need to then go try to force that on them, to the point that they don't really have any choice but to defend themselves and kill him. I think that was a good example of where they actually understood that what this person is doing, this is a dangerous person. And, even to the point of, like, yeah, even if they had to use that physical force to defend themselves, because he very much could have wiped out their entire population just by being so arrogant.
Right. I mean, it's not that we're saying like it's good that he died. It's, it's a tragedy all around. His family, things like that. I feel for them, but at the same time, there's a saying: play stupid games win stupid prizes.
Stupid prizes.
And it's kind of like, well, what did you think was going to happen? And just like we've talked about, maybe he's glad he got killed. Maybe he thinks he got martyred for Jesus and he's going to go to heaven. But either way, I'm not going to feel too bad because it's kind of, he kind of had it coming to him. That's a stupid thing to do. Very irresponsible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to conclude today's episode. I sure hope you guys enjoyed it. We like doing these. Do you agree with us? Let us know in the comments. What do you think about what we're sharing? Are we being too harsh, or do we make sense on this one? Let us know. Again, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out. We're happy to have you. And hit the like button as well to help us show up in the algorithms and help more people find our content. We appreciate that as well. Quick reminder, if you haven't yet, please download that initiation package. The link is below. We put together a really awesome free video course with some cool techniques and a bunch of other downloadable goodies for you. All you have to do is put in your email, and then you'll also be signed up for our newsletter where we're starting to put out more free content, good information there as well. So check that out. So that's going to wrap us up tonight. Thanks again for watching. And until next week, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.